My name is Saul Blau. I was born in Hungary, December 17th, 1930. We were seven siblings in my family. Most of them are much older uh, than me. So, but the three youngest siblings, I know a lot because we grew up together. We were children home in a very lovely, very religious, very traditional Jewish home, Hasidic lifestyle, and it was very difficult because we had to face these anti-Semitic laws. They were passed and restricted the uh, breadwinners practically to make a living. They were certain jobs and certain businesses they could not conduct. So it was a very difficult, but we were in our own home, and the parents tried to comfort the children as much as possible and shield them from any kind of harm. And that's the way we lived till the day we were taken away. Classmates didn't know much about really anti-Jewish hatred, but the teachers, they were promoting it, and they they wouldn't even call us by our first name. They called us Jew boy or Jew girl, and that we had to face every day. In the schoolyard was not bad, but on the way home from the schoolyard, you had to fight your way, and bloody noses and cracked heads were quite common by the time we got home. So I had to face it from a young age uh, till I was taken away, actually. I don't remember the date, but in 1944, I think it was March, the German army marched into Hungary because Hungary was an ally of Germany at that point. But then they marched into Hungary, and in a very short time, maybe in a week or 10 days' time, uh, that notorious Adolf Eichmann came, and right away he started to organize the deportation, the liquidation of the Hungarian Jews. And it was 1944, I don't remember the date, but the last day of Passover. And they knocked on the door and the window, neighbor, you have to be by 10 o'clock in the morning at the schoolyard with 15 pounds of personal belongings, and you'll be taken away. They didn't mention where or what, and that's actually what happened. We had to leave the house. We went to the schoolyard. They gathered together from a small village, maybe 50 or 55 Jewish families, and we were taken away to a bigger town, and that had a big Jewish temple, and that's what they made the ghetto. And within a week's time, the place got very small because they gathered all the Jews from the surrounding villages, and they put us up in a big factory. The big factory was only on a roof and some pillars that supported it, and no walls. It was quite cold yet in the springtime, but horrible condition, very little food. And just one morning they announced that they're marching us to the railroad station. Everybody has to give up all their personal belongings, jewelry, mainly money and that sort of thing. And then we got to the railroad station, and we saw the open cattle cars, and that's when the real horrible conditions started, when they loaded us into those cattle cars, 90 or 95 people, women, children, elderly. It was really terrible because it's very little air circulation, has only two little windows with some barbed wire in that car, and the bucket of water and a bucket for waste, which the bucket spilled right away as soon as and unfortunately, when I saw the movie, the documentary from the cattle cars, the sliding of the door, closing the door, I could still that noise. The noise still rings in my ear. The same way when they opened it when we arrived to Auschwitz, it had a very harsh sound to it, and it just still rings in my ear till this day. When I heard it again, it reminded me. And we spent 2.5 days in that journey, because that part of eastern part of Hungary was not that far away from Poland, but there was so much activity on the train, military, that they were shuffling back and forth. Maybe it would have been a 6-hour ride that they took 2.5 days, and it was very agonizing. Some people died, some terrible. And that's the way we arrived to Birkenau, which is the train station of Auschwitz. Chaotic situation, again, unloading the elderly, the young kids. We jumped off the car. Older people had to be taken off, some were shoved off, some were just plain. And we had to line up, women and children, one line, and men, able men, another line. A railroad track separated the two lines, and I stayed with my mother, a younger sister who was 2 years younger than me, and an older sister who was 2 years older than me. And as we were standing in line, a man who worked at the railroad station with a striped uniform approached my mother, and he asked in Yiddish, because that was the language that, because he may have been a Polish Jew or from France or Belgium, I don't know, but he was a veteran at that, and probably that was his job, to work on the railroad station, to unload the cars. And he asked my mother, how old is the young boy? My mother said he's exactly 13, he was just bar mitzvah. So he started to give a whole story, that I should leave the women's line and go to the men's line. And if somebody is gonna ask me how old I am, I should say I'm 18 years old, and I am strong enough to work. And he gave a whole story. It's gonna be better later on to get together with the family and help the family. So he gave a whole story. But more, he was talking to my mom, and I listened and I understood every word. My mom was holding my hand stronger and stronger. She didn't really want to let go. But by that age of 13, I was conditioned already, with anti-Semitic and horrible way that the Jews being treated. I figured this guy is working here, he knows what he's saying. And I told my mother, I'm gonna go back to the line and to find my father. But when I left my mother, and the line was moving, I couldn't find my father anymore. So I wind up in the end of the line with other kids that age, between age of 12 and 14. And we came to the point where the selection was, where Mengele was selecting. And I was afraid to say I'm 18. I said I'm 16, and they let me go. So I didn't know at that point where I'm going. Nobody really know, left or right, what it meant at that point. And we got to a central location where they took away our clothes, and disinfected all kind of chemicals they were pumping. And we had to go through a shower. Was a very minimal amount of water dripping, and we got a stripe. The only thing we were able to keep our shoes and our belt. I don't remember if I had a belt or not. So the shoes, and that took till the evening, early evening time, and they set us in a barrack, maybe 700 or 800 people, one of those empty barracks with empty shelves, 5 or 6 people to a shelf to sleep. And we were 2 kids between all the grown-ups. And at that point, nobody knew, the new arrivals, nobody knew what was happening. And they advised us, the grown-ups, we should go to the barrack commander and tell him our real story, that we are only 13 years old, that we lied, and we want to be reunited with our parents in there. So sure enough, we were scared. We were, the 2 of us had a brother or a father, nobody had uncle, So that's what we did, the 2 of us. And he took us to the door outside, and it was already dark, and he pointed to the chimney, and he told us, listen, you don't have any more parents. They were eliminated 2 hours from their arrival. And he was explaining the process, but it did not penetrate. We were just terrified. And he told us from now on, the only thing is try to somehow survive. If you have to march, you make sure you don't march on the outside. You try to march in the middle, that this way you were less visible to the Nazi or the guards or other capos or whatever it is. And it's gonna be very, very hard because you are kids and they will take advantage of you. So be strong and try to survive. Next day, we were taken to Auschwitz, which is the adjacent camp. And there, the first or the second day, I was tattooed. And my number is A3913, because this transport was one of the earliest transport that was from Hungarian Jews taken to Auschwitz. That's why I probably have a very low number, because it was we were the first or second or the third transport to be Hungarian Jews taken to Auschwitz. And after we were tattooed, somehow they got together approximately 180 or 200 kids from the age of 12 to age of 15, and they marched us off to a satellite camp of Auschwitz, which was called Jawischowitz, and it was approximately 8 or 9 miles distance from Auschwitz, and that happened to be a coal mining camp. Set us up in a special barrack, all the children, and that they assigned us to the factory, because when the coal comes up from the coal mine, it's not pure coal, it has some stones mixed in there, and that on the conveyor belt, before it shoots into the railroad cars, the stone has to be separated. So they assigned us to the conveyor belt, but 40 kids to a conveyor belt to sort the coal, the take of the stone. And that was inside the factory. It was a civilian-run factory, or owned probably also. And it was no barbed wire. We had a Polish political prisoners who were a couple, and he was trying to help us to get a little bit extra food from the kitchen in the factory. So we were in fairly, because anybody that wind up working in the coal mine didn't last more than 8 to 10 weeks. Because coal mining is a very hard work, even for professional coal miners. And there people, they with the food that they got and the conditions, their condition ran down. So they were selected, taken back for elimination, and a new group came. And I stayed in that camp from the middle of May till January 17th, middle of May 1944, till January 17th, 1945. And that was our regular job, and that was a lucky way of surviving to that point. That's the way of surviving. We were the kids. We worked in two different factories, but in the barrack, my shift was from 12 noon till 12 o'clock. Now we left the camp 12 noon, and we got back to camp approximately 12 at night. And Sundays we didn't work. So we were all together in that barrack, and we had very good friendship and support from each other, and our family stories and home, and kept us pretty much. That was a lucky way of having that job in that particular work camp. We were kids, and by that time we learned some Jewish history and some biblical stories from slavery in Egypt. It's somehow we accepted that's the lot of a Jew to go through this suffering, and the salvation is going to be the Messiah, who never showed, who never came. So we were coping, everybody individually probably was coping as much as they can, but we were hoping that we were going to survive, because we saw the Allied bombs, the Allied forces, the British and American forces constantly bombing every day, destroying factories all around us. So it was a hope that somehow we'll survive. That march was terrible, and in the beginning, like us, the kids, we were in fairly good condition, and I think we got from the factory a type of winter coat that was taken away from people that came to Auschwitz, and big red phosphorus sign on it that if you run away, that they know that you are an inmate from the camps, and that protected us a little bit. And like I said, when they chased us, otherwise you were afraid to stop or grab something, because anybody that slowed down or couldn't walk, they were eliminated on the spot. So when they chased us up the road, at least we had a chance to grab some clean snow and have some water. And I remember we slept in a barn one night, the other night just on the side of the road, sitting huddled up next to each other. And the third day we wind up, they took us to a train station, and it was an empty train, this time not closed cattle cars, open cattle cars. And they load up into this car. Anytime the train stopped in some forest type of surrounding, they always thought that this is the end. That's where they're gonna eliminate us. But we arrived to Buchenwald, which was a very, very famous, notorious political prisoner camp since 1937. And a lot of communists, socialists, and anybody that was against Hitler's ideas, they didn't put them into prison, they put them into concentration camps. There was a lot of political prisoners, a lot of Gentile people, and a lot of gay people, gypsies, from all over Europe. A lot of Russian POWs, there was some English. There was a lot of people in Buchenwald. So we arrived to Buchenwald. We didn't know what it was really. We only find out all these things later on, about the history of the camp. And we had to go through disinfection and shower. And we heard that disinfection and shower, and we thought that's going to be the end of it. And practically we said goodbye, and we were not in good condition anymore. We were very run-down condition, and we were very much afraid that that is going to be the last place that we're probably going to be eliminated. And to our surprise, instead of gas, hot water came from the showers. And of course we came alive. And when we reached the point, because they took away our clothing, because it was full of lice, and they gave us new clothing, and smiling faces was greeting us. So we didn't know what's going on here. So we engaged the people, and they told us that they are there 6-7 years. They are German or French or Belgian political prisoners, not Jews, Gentile people. And they didn't see kids for many years. And we reminded them of their kids that they left behind, their own kids. So they were very happy. They were not, they were happy to see kids. So that was a big surprise. And they were also part of the underground that we learned later on, that particular camp, the political prisoners had their own organization, underground organization, because they were in charge of the interior, of the running the interior business of the camp and all the factories that was around it. They were originally, the Germans had regular criminals running the camps. They were very brutal, they were horrible, but they didn't have skills of organization to run factories and things. So eventually the Gestapo, the German authorities, turned it over to the political prisoners who were very educated, highly intelligent, and they were running the inside operation and some of the factories that surrounded. So as they gained power, and they formed their own underground organization. And then this underground organization helped to survive the kids in Buchenwald. That's why 904 kids were liberated in Buchenwald, and they were helpful in our survival. Okay, I think I arrived to Buchenwald the 27th or 28th of January in 1945. And our liberation was April 11, 1945. So I spent there 3 months, 2.5 months, something. So the Jewish camp, which was horrible condition, that was Barrack 66, was a children's camp. And after a few days, for some reason, they separated the youngest ones. So I was taken with that young group to the main camp, to Barrack 8, which was a showcase for the Danish Red Cross. A dummy show, not a real, you know. But anyway, it helped us a little bit because we got some food, some packages from the Danish Red Cross once in a while, and our conditions were much, much better than in the, we had decent blankets, decent bunks, so we fairly, and it was ran by a block commander, they call him a block eldester, you know, the elder of the block, was a German communist. His name was Hamann Wilhelm, and he was part of that underground. And a week before the liberation, before April 11th, one night the loudspeakers announced that all Jews have to assemble on the main assembly line to be ready for the march. And we got scared, and our barrack leader said, from now on you are not Jews, we're going to give you insignias to sign. You know, the Jews had at the Magen David, the Star of David, half red, half yellow, and the number. And other nationalities, the Polish had a P with their number, and Ukrainians. And so they gave us this type of a emblem to sew on to our shirts. And next morning, because we didn't have to go to the big assembly place, because this barrack had like barbed wires around, it was quarantined type of a barrack. So the SS officers came there for the head count, and they were yelling, Jews step forward, and nobody moved. Then they went to the barrack commander, they told him, pull the Jews out. He says, I don't have no Jews, it's all kind of nationalities. And that particular point, there was a big commotion, because the German guards were already nervous themselves. They know that or the American or the Russian forces are very close by, closing in on them. They were hoping there's going to be the Americans, not the Russians. And they just took off and they left us. And and next day, the first they took away 19,000 Jews that time from the camp on a death march. And next day they were taking everybody. 6, 7, 8,000 people at a day. And April 11th, Wednesday morning, my barrack elders came. We have no choice. The Gestapo is here. And our barrack is on line to be marched off. And we assembled outside. And about 10:30, 11 o'clock, the air raid siren started to blaze. And everybody was chased back to the barrack. And you have to lay low, nothing moves, you know, watch out, don't go to the window. And by 1 o'clock we saw that people are sneaking around with rifles wrapped up in blankets. They had guns in the camp, this underground. But anyway, they didn't have to use it. By 2:45, the loudspeakers announced that the first American tanks arrived. The camp is liberated, nobody should move because it's still dangerous. By the way, if you look at the picture of Buchenwald, the clock is still set exactly the same, they didn't move it. That's the way. Because the main tower and a few things are still remained in Buchenwald, because Buchenwald became East Germany. The American forces had to pull back after 3 months. And but anyway, we were very hungry because there was no kitchen anymore, no supplies. So we broke through, the barbed wire had no more electricity in it. And where can you find food? In the SS barracks. So we were not lucky enough, we didn't find any good stuff. We find a big box of biscuits, which turned out to be the dog biscuits for the SS dogs. and we ate them. But was our luck, because anybody that find all kind of canned goods, German canned goods, and ate, gorged themselves, they became sick and a lot of people died after the liberation from that typhus and the dysentery. A lot of people. So we were lucky to eat that dog fish. I went to Prague with a Czech transport, and they had some place set up for us because they heard kids are coming in very bad mental and physical condition, but we were not that bad because we had fair in that barricade, we had fair type of food, and so we were in pretty good shape by that time. And 6 weeks they separated the kids, and the American army doctors wouldn't let us eat heavy food. They gave us a lot of dry cereal, which we hated if we want to eat the real stuff. But they knew what they were doing. And first of all, we were showered with Hershey bars from the tanks and from the American forces that passed by, and chewing gum if you didn't know what it was. So till today, I love those Hershey bars still today, because that was the part of the daily ration of the American forces. So it was for us seeing the Americans, and 4 or 5 days after the liberation, Eisenhower came to Buchenwald, and Edward Murrow, you heard of it, who was a very famous journalist at that time, was everything recorded. So it was a very, and Roosevelt died maybe April 16 or 17, right after we were liberated. So all these things were happening after the liberation. But when we got to Prague, the only way we could travel, because the trains were so crowded with refugees, that the only way to travel on top of the train. And we kids were stupid enough to climb on the top of the train. And I got to Budapest, and I met right away representatives of the young Zionist youth movement, who were right away looking for because very few young people came back, and they had set up homes already to take them in, and of course try to indoctrinate them with the Zionist ideology and to go to Palestine. So that's where I wind up, and that was my, and I find a sister of mine who survived in Budapest in the ghetto, and that's the way I started my life. So the Zionist youth movement gave me a lot of courage and a lot of hope that eventually the Israeli state is going to be come to happen, and something to look forward to it, and that was for us. So not just looking back to the misery and everything else, it was like hope for the future, and that helped a lot for a young boy like me, and not just me, other ones, friends of mine, who wind up also in the same type of surrounding, and of course we made it to Israel. They closed the border to the west, the Iron Curtain, because first they didn't want to take us to Palestine because the British we wind up in Cyprus. So we had to wait. Israel became a state, and when Israel became a state, it took quite a while to organize, because you couldn't go to the west, to Vienna, to Austria. So you had to go into a communist country, to another bit, Czechoslovakia, cross the border, and eventually to Austria. This was all the Bricha, which was the underground Zionist youth movement, who who was channeling refugees from after Holocaust survivors from the east to west Germany into those camps, and eventually people were waiting for the visas to the United States or Argentina, and quite a few want to go to Israel when Israel became a state. So it took a process. So I would say from July, and I got to Israel, to Haifa, in middle of December. And was just the end of the War of Independence. So we were and wind up in, never had a passport, never had a piece of paper. It was all illegally channeled, from southern Italy, Bari, the port of Bari in southern Italy, took us a week in a Turkish cattle boat to Haifa. And we arrived Haifa on Shabbat. They didn't unload the ship on Shabbat. So Sunday morning, the army trucks backed in to the ramp, and anybody that was 18 went straight into the army. Some kids were younger, they went to Aliyat Noar, to the kibbutzim, but we went straight to basic training into the army. The time in the army, it was a collection of kibbutz galuyot now. The gathering of the exiles from all over the world, from Morocco, from Algeria, from Eastern Europe, Yiddish-speaking, Arabic-speaking, Ladino. The Turkish kids spoke Ladino also, but everybody knew a little bit Hebrew already by that time, because we learned, quite a bit. And by the way, when I was in Budapest, I went to a vocational high school because I was not a student. So that was it was an experience, the basic training. I was two months in basic training in Kfar Yona, and then they were giving after the test, and because I had that vocational 3 years of vocational background, they were looking to organize for the Israeli Air Force a technical group of young people who are going to be the support for the technicians to support for the Air Force flyers and planes mechanics. So I was qualified for that, and I wind up and I spent 2 years in the Israeli Air Force working in a machine shop, continuing what I was learning in vocational school, and I became a tool and die maker, and that was my profession. And when it was in Army 49, 50 and part of 51, and we had a hard time after it. Very few jobs, very few housing, but eventually, slowly, it was not enough electricity for the industry. We were scheduled, everybody had to work at 1 week at a month at night. Which for us, Haifa, in the industrial section of Haifa, because I moved to Haifa after the army, and it was no family. Today they call it Chayal Boded, lone soldier. That time everybody was alone. and that's it. I had 2 sisters. One went to Sweden after the war. Because all her friends were very sick. And she wasn't that sick, but she didn't want to be separated from her friends. So the Swedish government only took sick people to nurse them back to life. Some people wind up a year and a half in hospitals who were in terrible run-down condition, but my sister was not. And I had an uncle in the United States already from 1935 or 36 who happened to be a rabbi, and he arranged for her to come to the United States. And that's the sister I went to Auschwitz together. She's still alive today, lives in Brooklyn, Borough Park. And another sister who got married in Germany right away. After the war, they made it to the United States in 1946 or 47. So I was corresponding once in a while, out of sight, out of mind type of, but we picked up and they kept calling me, come visit. So I was a single man, 25-year-old. I want to see the world a little bit. I want to see my sisters. And by that time they were married with little nieces, 4 or 5 years old or maybe younger. So I came and I listened. The golden Medina, the golden country, it's not so easy to leave. Only just for a few years. Yeah, just a few years. And then I met my wife, I got married, I have a family, and that's the way it goes, Now let me tell you an experience that I had in Israel. When I wound up in the Air Force base, so there were a lot of sabra, because they had technical, they went also to school, Haifa, the Technion, no, not the Technion, they had vocational schools. They were the same age as me, 18, 18 and a half, between 18 and 19, and we wind up to be friends, working, the same machine shop, the same other technical things, and they saw my number, and I'm the same age, and they confronted me, what was going on with you Jews in the diaspora, my father was in the Palmach, my uncle was in the Haganah, and we were running live grenades, hiding it from the British from one basement to the other. And 5 Arab countries attacked us, and we were 600,000 Jews here and beat them back. And you guys, by the millions, lined up to the ovens like sheep. They didn't understand. They didn't know what was going on. So who wanted to talk about the Holocaust? I was at the bus in Haifa, and people were sitting down, and I was holding on to the strap, and they saw my number. They asked me similar questions. So who wanted to talk? It was no big deal to be a Holocaust survivor. So that kept me quiet, because I didn't want to be that ghetto Jew that I wanted to be like the Israeli ones. Now this is the personal thing that I'm telling you here. Not too many people had that confrontation. So who wanted to talk? When they captured Eichmann in 1961, they brought him to Israel, and they had a 100-day trial, and every journalist from the world was there, and it was already, Israel, they hadn't had television yet, I think. It was televised all over the world. Then the Israelis learned also, because they were so busy, the Israelis, with their own thing that what was going on, they know that they're killing Jews left and right. But this was nobody wanted to that much. Sorry, I am. So that's what it was. And then Schindler's List. People who came in their 80s, early 80s, already, some of the survivors, and they figured, everybody was busy to make a living, learn the language, not to burden the grandkids with horror stories and things like that. So, but then they figured, if I'm not telling my story, I'm 80 years old, or 78 years old, or 81 years old, nobody will know it. Then Then also the Spielberg Foundation. I went back with my sons in 95 to the 50th anniversary of the liberation to Buchenwald. So everybody, it was a big celebration, and right after that, the Spielberg Foundation, my son wrote an article that Robert in the Chicago Tribune that time, so somebody read it. I was one of the first ones to be interviewed for that Spielberg Foundation. So that's when it started. And then today it's getting to be a novel type of a thing. So, but the reason there was no. I happened to move to Bal Harbour as a snowbird when I married my second wife. I didn't know nothing about. I spent 3 days in Florida to see my in-laws when they were renting for the winter months. I had nothing, but my second wife was very much, and there was a whole big community in Bal Harbour, Holocaust survivors, and the temple that I belonged, eventually very Jewish center, was wall-to-wall Holocaust survivors. It was built by Holocaust survivors. And even the chairman of the board today, till today, is a Holocaust survivor of the temple. So it was a big community. It's all gone. You met quite a few of them that were not around. Try to learn history, and not just from the latest develops of news that appears on your iPhone. Please try to educate yourself and be aware, because when it comes to this type of hatred, it engulfs the whole world.